So at Angel Island, we went through a number of the case files of some of these boats, people who came in 1940, and we wrote this story. A volunteer named Ann Hawkins wrote a story about a woman named Rosa Ginsberg, and we found her file, and all Ann wrote about was in the file, that Rosa had come to this country, and when questioned on Angel Island, she had said she came to the U.S. to get married, and her fiance or boyfriend was questioned on Ellis Island, and he said he knew Miss Ginsberg, but they were not engaged, but I don't know. And then she was finally released when her uncle came through with some funds to let her take the train to the East Coast and some additional money. So we left it at that. We said, if anyone knows what happened to Rosa and Herbert, please let us know. And then Michael, our director, got an email from Jeff Klein that said, by the way, I'm the son of Rosa and Herbert. So we're really thrilled to have Jeff here today to talk about his family story, and he came all the way from Las Vegas. So please welcome Jeff Klein.
First, I have to thank Ann Hawkins for an amazing, touching story that helped get me moving and reaching out, but also helped me know my mother a little differently. Like many immigrants, I think my mother is very emblematic of the experience that many people have when they flee oppression. And when Hitler marched into Austria and annexed it, the very cosmopolitan Jewish community in Vienna had their world rocked. And like an exploding star, started to flee. And as my mother told me on one occasion, people she knew her whole lifetime turned on her, were throwing rocks through windows and so on. So my mother, in the company of her mother, her sister Helen, her father, Helen's husband, managed, with the help of the Chinese Schindler, to make her way from Vienna to Shanghai, China, via a boat ride that also took her through Colombo, Sri Lanka. And at the age of 16, my mother arrives in China with her family in Shanghai. And as I say, had it not been for the Chinese consul who wrote her exit visa, I suspect my family never would have made it out alive. So there's Mom, age 16, and on her way. And you can see the journey as her passport gets stamped. What's really fundamentally important about my mother is that she mirrored a spirit of resilience and optimism, and in that spirit, she was not only able to make this journey in very harrowing circumstances, but keep her eye on her future star. And her future star was to be my father, Herbert. Now, Dad also had left Vienna, and he made it to the United States, to New York. He was actually, we found out in rummaging through pictures, he came over via the Queen Mary. And he had got sponsored because he was quite a soccer player. And in those days, companies would sponsor people to come over and play soccer for their team. So Dad got into the United States. His visa was granted on that basis. And the company was Alcoa, by the way. So Dad got here and settles in New York. Dad's mother, my grandmother Olga, makes it out of Vienna and she ends up in Australia, where she sat out the war as a domestic servant, cooking and cleaning in the home of a wealthy person. So Mom arrives here. She's in China 2 years and decides to make her way here. So she leaves her mother. She's now 18. She leaves her mother and her older sister Helen and Helen's young daughter, Dixie. She leaves them in Shanghai and makes her way to this very place. One of the things that struck me in this journey also was the thought of leaving family behind, not even in their homes, but in strange lands. And having the courage, the chach, as they say in Jewish, in Yiddish, to intestinal fortitude, to pick up, take your life in your hands, chase your star, and go, leaving all behind. So Mom is questioned here, and eventually, as Grant was kind enough to share, she reaches out to my father. Now, my father's situation is he's right now scared to death. Because remember, he's an immigrant. All of a sudden, one night, there's knock, knock, knock on his door, and he is whisked away to Ellis Island. So all he can think of is, the Germans coming in Vienna. Now he's being whisked away in the middle of the night to be questioned. Well, it turns out they questioning him about my mother. And my mother had taken the position that they were engaged. Dad wasn't quite sure of that because Mom had actually dated one of my dad's closest friends in Vienna. They knew each other pretty well, but he didn't think they were quite at that point in time. But in any case, my mother's uncle does bond out the $500 necessary to get my mother in, forwards some cash, and Mom heads for New York and actually ends up living with one of my uncles and reconnecting with my father. And you can see them here right around that time. This is the 40s. A couple of years later, in October of 1941, my parents get married. War starts. Shortly thereafter, my father enters the military. My mother is a cutter in a sweatshop in New York City, working in to create clothing and to get by and living in what was the tenements of the day in the city. At the end of the war, the young couple moves to the Bronx, to another tenement. They call them the projects, and you can see that right here. That's 711 Magenta Street, where as a youngster I remember. And this is the country. The country here, by the way, is 30 minutes away on the other side of the Tappan Zee Bridge in what is Orange County, New York, and where they used to have farms that would have bungalows. And you could get a bungalow and you could hang out for a week or 2 weeks or longer during the summer. So, 1948 rolls around and I come into the world. And a few years later, my sister Debbie arrives. And my parents had moved from the Bronx. My father had worked in an orphanage shoveling coal to keep the water hot and the heat in the winter going. And he manages to find a job in Brooklyn with a small manufacturer of little camera kits. And Bill Lawson takes a shine to my dad. And my dad, who's an engineer by training, ends up as a manufacturing supervisor. And that starts a career in manufacturing management for my father. And so, not well off yet, but anxious. They moved to Long Island into one of the post-World War II communities in the 50s, and they buy a little house in Hicksville, Long Island. And the family moves there with my grandmother, my father's mother, who has now made it into the United States. And I grow up there as my sister. And then you can see my mother and my father here. This is 1973 at our wedding. My wife Barbara's here today. This is my sister Debbie. And on the right-hand side, you can see a passport picture of them circa that era. And you can see the love, the care of their hearts, having found each other and had made a life together. So, my parents had the quintessential American immigrant life. My father finds work, my mother raises a family. They travel together. And through life, they traveled together. It's the thing that storybooks are made of. You can see that here, this is their 50th wedding anniversary. And here, this is about 8 years later in Florida, where they had retired. My father's health had started to fail, and he couldn't work any longer. He was at the retirement age of the era anyway, and so they moved to Florida. And they had that, my mother used to call it the place in the sun. They found that spot where the two of them could walk hand in hand, every day doing things together. I think in many respects, their story is just so emblematic of what other immigrants have experienced. What makes it unique for me is that I've come to know my parents so much better in recent years. The things that I thought I knew about my mother and my father, and my grandparents, my grandmothers, the things they wouldn't share because of the hardships that they had to endure in making the transition. I now can go back and I can think, gee, my father told me this about my mother, and my father told me that about my mother. Trying to help me better understand my mother's character. And it all kind of came together for me when I read that article. So to kind of bring the story full around, it was very much a love story that found its natural resolution when they got together and they got a chance to live the life they were both meant to be, intended to have together. But it's also a story of strength and resilience in the face of adversity that I think is so typical of immigrants who come to this country fleeing, whether it's political oppression, fleeing for their lives, or fleeing economic oppression. I think it is a shared story. And so I have great gratitude for the opportunity to explore my parents' lives. And hope that in their story you feel some of the story of your own families. And sense that natural kinship that I think we all have in this journey together. So I thank you very much. A classically trained singer, she's gone to the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, both undergraduate and graduate, and started out to be an opera singer. Still sings opera, but has kind of migrated into her passion of Yiddish. And so she has resurrected Yiddish music, lost Yiddish music, and but she has also acquired, in part from Barbara's father, who lived with us. As my grandmother lived with my parents, as I grew up, my father's mother lived with us. And by the way, my mother's mother, who eventually made it here to San Francisco, lived with my mother's sister right here in San Francisco. As we had the generations, so my daughter had the generation of my father-in-law, who lived with us for over 20 years. And through his experience and through our conversations has acquired a passion for our family and for our culture and for our history. And her next project, we hope, is to tell those immigrant stories that are in Immigrant Voices by placing them into a musical piece that she intends to write, and I hope perform for the benefit of the foundation sometime in the not too distant future.